A mother never notices the exact moment her child begins to drift away. It happens slowly, quietly, like a shadow stretching across the floor at sunset, barely visible until it covers everything. That's how it was with Ayan. For years it was just the two of us, learning how to breathe again after his father's death. I held on to him like he was the last reminder of our life we once had. He held on to me because he had no one else. We built our days around simple routines: school, dinner, homework, sleep, and in those early years, even in grief, there was a softness between us, a wordless promise that we would face the world together. I remember how he used to wait for me at the balcony every evening, waving the moment he saw me turn the corner from work. He'd run downstairs, almost stumbling over his shoes, eager to tell me everything that happened at school. I'd pretend to be surprised even when his stories made no sense. I just wanted to hear his voice, feel his warmth, remind myself that despite the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, I was doing at least one thing right. He was growing, he was smiling, he was safe. I thought that was enough. But children don't stay children. They grow, they question, and sometimes they grow away. The first change came quietly. Ayan stopped waiting on the balcony. I'd find him instead with his headphones on, eyes glued to his phone. When I asked about his day, his answers shrank from full stories to single words. I told myself it was normal. Boys his age didn't share everything. Still, something subtle had shifted, like a door he once kept open was now inching shut. I tried to ignore it. I had to. I didn't have the luxury of breaking down every time something worried me. Bills had to be paid. Meals had to be cooked. Life had to continue whether or not my heart felt uneasy. So I convinced myself it was just a phase. Every teenager pulls away, I told myself, it will pass. Then, early in 2025, his circle of friends changed. They weren't boys I knew. They were older, louder boys who carried themselves with a swagger that didn't belong in our neighborhood. They dressed like they wanted attention and spoke like they dared someone to challenge them. Ayan had always been quiet. Suddenly he wanted to be like them. He started coming home late, brushing off my questions with vague excuses. Group project, football practice, missed the bus, phone battery died. The excuses piled up like stones in my stomach. I noticed the new clothes too. Brands I couldn't afford, shoes that looked too expensive for a child still asking me for lunch money. When I asked where he got them, he shrugged and said one of his friends hooked him up. I wanted to press him. I wanted to demand answers, but I hesitated, afraid of pushing him further away. I had worked so hard to raise him alone that I convinced myself trust was more important than confrontation. But trust requires honesty, and the honesty between us was dissolving. Sometimes he'd come home smelling like smoke. Not cigarettes exactly, but something bitter, something dangerous. When I asked about it, he snapped at me for the first time. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut. I stood there staring at him, stunned, while he disappeared into his room. The door shut between us with the finality of a wall being built brick by brick. I began to lose sleep. My thoughts chased each other until dawn. Where was he? Who was he with? What was he becoming? I'd sit by the window at night, watching the street, waiting to see his silhouette turn the corner. Every time he came home safe, I breathed out a relief so heavy it made my chest hurt. Yet I never said anything in the morning. I couldn't afford to start a fight that might push him further into the arms of the friends who were already replacing me. Then the requests for money began. He'd ask for small amounts at first, but the frequency grew. When I asked what he needed it for, he'd roll his eyes, mutter something about school or food or helping a friend. I knew he was lying. A mother knows, but again, I let it slide. I was terrified of finding out the truth. Terrified it might be something I couldn't fix. Children make mistakes, I told myself. He'll come back. He'll outgrow this. He just needs time. But the gap between us widened until I felt like I was living with a stranger. He stopped eating with me, choosing to eat in his room or outside. He stopped talking unless he needed something. Birthdays, memories, inside jokes. Everything that once connected us felt like a distant dream. I tried to reach out in small ways. I'd leave his favorite snacks on the table, buy him notebooks, ask about school, offer help with assignments. He barely acknowledged any of it. His mind was elsewhere, somewhere I couldn't follow. I saw fear in him sometimes too, though he tried to hide it. A sudden tension in his shoulders when his phone buzzed, the way he looked out the window before leaving the house, the way he flinched when I entered his room unexpectedly. But whenever I asked, his expression hardened. And he told me to stop acting like a police officer. I wasn't acting like a police officer. I was acting like a mother dying of worry. The day he stopped saying goodnight was the day I realized something precious had slipped away. Our home felt colder, emptier, even though we were both still living in it. I began to dread coming home from work, unsure of what version of him I'd encounter. Silent, angry, distracted, or simply gone. My life revolved around pretending everything was fine so I wouldn't break down in front of him. I needed to stay strong. I thought that's what parents were supposed to do. What I didn't know was that while I was losing sleep, losing peace, losing the boy I raised, something far worse was brewing beneath the surface. Something that would drag us both somewhere I never imagined. A courtroom. A place where truth is meant to stand tall but instead becomes a weapon in the hands of fear. And long before we walked into that room, the seeds of betrayal had already been planted, watered by silence, secrecy, and the slow fading of a bond I once believed was unbreakable. The day everything snapped began like any other, with me going through my routine while carrying 1,000 silent worries in my chest. I had grown used to living with that heaviness, Ayan's distance, the strange people he called friends, the unanswered questions swirling around his sudden changes, but nothing prepared me for the phone call that shook the foundation of my life. It was late afternoon when the unknown number flashed on my screen. A cold feeling spread through me even before I answered. The officer's voice was firm but not unkind as he explained that Ayan had been involved in a dispute at a parking lot. Something about a fight, a damaged car, and a shopkeeper who felt threatened. I remember clutching the edge of the table to steady myself. As he spoke, I kept repeating in my mind, "Not my son, not my son," as if thinking it hard enough would change the facts. When I reached the police station, I expected to find Ayan scared, remorseful, desperate for help. Instead, he sat with his hood up, his expression unreadable, like he had already accepted his place in that hard metal chair. He didn't look at me when I called his name. His eyes were fixed on the floor, jaw locked, the muscles in his face twitching with frustration. It was the first time I saw him look like someone I didn't know at all. The officers explained that a shopkeeper had filed a formal complaint, claiming Ayan and his friends had been causing trouble for weeks, loitering, arguing, intimidating customers. I listened in disbelief. My Ayan? The boy who used to cry if he accidentally stepped on a bug? But the officer's tone left no room for denial. They had witnesses. They had statements. And they had a very angry shopkeeper demanding action. Even then my instinct was to protect him. I defended him fiercely, telling the officers he wasn't that kind of boy, that he must have been caught up in something he didn't understand. I pleaded for leniency, for time, for anything that would shield him from what awaited. Mothers carry their children's pain like their own, and in that moment, I was ready to shoulder it all. But they made it clear, the case would go to court. The days leading up to the hearing were heavy with silence. Ayan barely spoke to me, but I could see the tension in his posture, the way he avoided my gaze, the jumpiness in his movements, the constant checking of his phone. Something had shifted inside him, something dark and afraid. I wanted to reach out to pull him close, but every time I tried he retreated further. I felt like I was chasing shadows, trying to catch a version of my son that no longer existed. When the court date finally came, the air itself felt sharp. I dressed Ayan in his best clothes, straightened his collar, and told him everything would be okay. He didn't respond. He followed me into the courtroom like someone being led through a tunnel he couldn't see the end of. I kept whispering that I was with him, that we would face this together, but his silence was louder than any scream. Courtrooms are strange places. Even before anyone speaks, the atmosphere is heavy with judgment. The wooden benches, the echo of footsteps, the quiet murmur of lawyers. All of it creates a pressure that squeezes your ribs. I sat beside Ayan, my hand resting lightly on his arm, hoping for a sign he still trusted me. He didn't pull away, but he also didn't lean in. He simply stared straight ahead. The prosecution painted a version of events that made my heart sink. They described the boys as troublemakers, instigators, threats to the shopkeeper and the community. And then came the blow I didn't expect. They suggested that Ayan's behavior reflected poor guidance at home. Suddenly eyes turned toward me. I wasn't the one on trial, but I felt exposed all the same. As if my years of sacrifice, my endless attempts to be both mother and father, were being dismissed with a single careless accusation. My lawyer assured the judge that such claims were baseless, but the prosecution wasn't done. They had one more move, a cruel one. They called Ayan to the stand. My breath caught. I had assumed he might be questioned about the incident, but I believed, with absolute certainty, that he would defend me, that he would speak the truth, that he would remember who stood by him through everything. Ayan walked slowly to the stand, shoulders stiff, eyes distant. I wanted him to look at me just once so I could remind him silently that I was there. He didn't. The questions began simply. Where he was, who he was with, what happened before the fight. His voice was low, strained but steady. I watched him closely, praying he wouldn't get overwhelmed. And then the prosecutor shifted the tone. Has your mother ever encouraged you to avoid responsibility for your actions? He asked, his voice smooth and cold. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. Ayan hesitated, only for a moment, but that single moment stretched like an eternity. He swallowed, glanced at the prosecutor, then lowered his eyes. "Yes," he said. The word hit me like a punch to the chest. My hands trembled. A ringing sound filled my ears. I looked at him in disbelief, waiting for him to correct himself, to say he misspoke, to take it back. Instead, he stared at the floor, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. The prosecutor continued, guiding him to insinuate that I'd sometimes covered for him, excused his mistakes, protected him even when I shouldn't have, twisting small truths into a damning narrative. And my son let him. Every sentence he spoke felt like a blade carving into me. I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to stand up and deny everything, but my voice was gone. I had defended him his entire life, and in that moment, he chose a story that distanced him from me. When he stepped down from the stand, I tried to catch his gaze, but he walked past me as if I were invisible. I stared at his retreating figure, fighting the overwhelming ache in my chest. I had prepared myself for the court's judgment, for the shopkeeper's anger, even for the possibility of my son facing punishment. But I had never imagined that the deepest wound would come from the boy I gave everything to. The rest of the hearing blurred into background noise. Lawyers spoke, papers shuffled, the judge gave instructions. But all I could think about was that single word, yes, echoing like a betrayal I never expected. When we left the courtroom, Ayan didn't walk beside me. He didn't speak. His friends were waiting outside, and he drifted toward them without hesitation. They laughed, joked, acted as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just broken something inside me that might never fully heal. I stood there, watching him from a distance, my heart heavy with the pain I couldn't put into words. The boy I raised, the child I protected with every breath in my body, had chosen someone else's version of him over the truth we shared. And I realized in that moment that the courtroom hadn't just judged the case. It had exposed the widening gulf between us, a gulf that had been growing long before anyone stepped inside that room. The days after the court hearing were filled with a silence that felt heavier than any shouting match could have been. Ayan moved around the house like a shadow, appearing suddenly, disappearing just as quickly, drifting through rooms without ever meeting my eyes. I tried to speak to him once or twice, but each attempt died before the words could leave my mouth. I no longer knew what to say. I didn't know how to reach him. A part of me didn't even know if he would listen. And beneath that uncertainty pulsed a deeper wound, the memory of him standing in the witness box, choosing a story that carved straight through me. By October, the tension in the house had turned into something sharper. I noticed new habits. Ayan triple-checking the door before leaving, glancing over his shoulder when his phone vibrated, pacing restlessly in the middle of the night. His friends, the ones I had grown to distrust, visited more frequently. They never came inside, but their motorcycles idled outside the house, loud and impatient, drowning the neighborhood in noise. Ayan would step out, whispering urgently with them, and return with a look that mixed fear, guilt, and something like desperation. One morning I found a crumpled paper stuffed halfway under his bed. It was a notice, nothing official, just a handwritten demand for money. An amount so large I felt the blood drain from my face. The words were threatening, the tone unmistakably dangerous. My hands shook as I read it. I realized then that whatever Ayan had been involved in was deeper, darker and heavier than anything I had imagined. This wasn't teenage rebellion. This wasn't bad company. This was a trap closing around him faster than he could escape. When he returned home that evening, I confronted him. Not gently, not calmly, but with all the fear that had been piling up inside me. I held the paper in my hand and demanded an explanation. His reaction wasn't defensive at first, it was terror. I saw it clearly, the way his breath caught, the way his pupils dilated, the way he grabbed the paper with trembling fingers. But instead of confessing, instead of letting the fear soften him, he lashed out. He shouted that it wasn't my business, that I didn't understand, that I had no right to judge him after what happened in court. His voice cracked with anger and frustration, and mixed somewhere inside it was guilt he didn't know how to express. I tried to reason with him, to remind him that I was the only person who had ever stood by him, that I had worked myself to the bone to keep him safe. But my words barely reached him. He was drowning in something too deep for either of us to navigate. When I mentioned the courtroom, when I said with a shaking voice that he had shattered me the moment, he lied under oath, his anger faltered, his expression twisted as if the memory punched him in the gut. For a second he looked like the little boy he once was, the one who would burst into tears when he disappointed me. He didn't cry this time, but he couldn't look at me either. He whispered, I didn't know what to do. They told me if I said something, it would be easier for me. I was scared. Those words didn't erase anything, but they explained everything. The betrayal had not come from hatred or resentment. It had come from fear, from pressure, from a desperate attempt to escape consequences he didn't know how to face. Still, understanding didn't erase the pain, and pain built walls just as fast as fear did. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. He locked himself in his room. I sat on the sofa staring at the silent walls, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The next morning his door was still shut. I assumed he was asleep until I saw the folded note taped to it. My heart clenched as I reached for it. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. The message was short but carried 1,000 unspoken emotions. "I'm sorry, I don't deserve to stay. I'll fix things on my own." My hands went numb. I pushed his door open with trembling fingers. The room was empty. His bag was gone. Some of his clothes too. The window was slightly open, curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. Panic exploded inside me. I rushed outside, scanning the street, calling his name. But there was no sign of him. My voice cracked from shouting, but no answer came. Hours passed like minutes. I ran through the market, checked the bus stop, walked the alleys he used to play in as a child, hoping desperately to spot him sitting somewhere alone, waiting for me to find him. I asked neighbors, shopkeepers, even his old school friends. No one had seen him. By afternoon my legs were trembling from exhaustion. The sun was harsh but my skin felt cold. My thoughts spiraled into dark corners. What if he was hurt? What if he had fallen deeper into trouble? What if I never saw him again? I tried calling his phone 12 times. It remained switched off. Every unanswered ring scraped another layer off my heart. As evening settled and the sky darkened, I found myself outside the courthouse, the very place where everything between us had shattered. I sat on the same bench where I once collapsed after hearing his testimony. The memories flooded back, tightening around my chest until I could barely breathe. Tears slid silently down my face, not just for the betrayal, but for the possibility that I might lose him forever. Not to the law or to his mistakes, but to the world that had swallowed him whole. While I sat there, numb and exhausted, a police car slowed beside the building. An officer stepped out and approached me cautiously, as if recognizing a fracture in my posture. He asked my name, then gently said the words I had been desperate and terrified to hear. "We found your son." For a moment my body went weightless, my throat tightened. I managed to whisper, "Is he's safe," the officer said quickly, reading the fear in my expression. He came to the station himself. Relief washed over me so fast it made me dizzy. I followed the officer without hesitation. My steps were shaky, but my heart raced ahead of me, pulling me toward the place where Ian waited. When I saw him sitting alone in the station, hunched forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands, something inside me cracked open. He wasn't defiant, he wasn't angry, he wasn't hiding behind his friends or his pride. He looked like a boy who had finally reached the edge of everything he could pretend not to feel. He lifted his head when he heard my footsteps. His eyes were swollen, red, filled with a guilt so raw it made my breath hitch. The moment he saw me, his face crumpled. Tears spilled over as he choked out a broken apology, words tumbling over each other. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. I messed everything up." Before I could think, I wrapped my arms around him. He clung to me with a desperation that reminded me of when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. His body shook against mine, and I held him tight, feeling the weight of months, maybe years, of unspoken pain finally breaking loose. We walked home slowly that night, side by side, not speaking much. Our steps were unsure, the air between us fragile but different from before. Something had shifted, something old had cracked, but something new was trying to form in the space left behind. Ian kept his head down, wiping his eyes now and then. He whispered again that he wanted to change, that he wanted to do better, that he didn't want to lose me the way he was losing himself. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know how long healing would take, or whether the wounds we carried would ever fully close. But, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was walking alone,